I want to tell you a story about the worst friend I ever had. It all started here at Western. I was about halfway through my first year of university, and I started to go through a really tough time. The novelty and fun of first year had worn off, and it seemed like all I could feel was stress, overwhelm, sadness, loneliness. It was around this time that I met a new friend named Ed. Ed right away saw how poorly I was doing. They saw how out of control I felt in my life and started to suggest things to help me feel better, things to help me feel a little bit less helpless with my situation. You could lose some weight, Ed said. I mean, let's be honest, this freshman year hasn't been kind to you, and you were much happier before when you were skinnier. While this was a harsh thing to hear, it felt true. I knew that over the course of my first 4 months at school, I had gained weight. I was no longer playing competitive soccer like I had every day since I was 10, and I didn't know anything about nutrition or how to properly fuel myself. And so, when Ed suggested the one thing that could supposedly be the magic fixer of my life, I believed it. I became convinced that if I lost weight, I might not feel so terrible all the time. And so, I started to restrict what I ate. I pushed myself to get to the gym every single day to burn as many calories as I possibly could. And I began to purge my food when it felt like I ate too much. All of a sudden, years had gone by, and I had a daily, strict routine of restriction, over-exercising, and purging behaviors that took priority over absolutely anything else. And where was Ed during all of this? Right in the middle of it. Ed was the one encouraging me to continue prioritizing these unhealthy behaviors, encouraging me to restrict more, purge more, exercise more, all to be smaller. But the narrative that Ed had begun with, the promise of happiness associated with being smaller, it had completely changed. Ed had grown harsher and harsher as the days went on. Keep running, Ed would tell me at the gym. He would like you more if you were smaller. You know, you wouldn't be so stressed about school if you would just eat less. And by now, I imagine you're thinking to yourself, what kind of friend is this? Right? Like truly, who would say that to someone? And yes, this is where it's time for me to be truthful, because the thing is, Ed did say all of this stuff to me. But Ed wasn't my friend. Ed wasn't actually a real person. Ed was my eating disorder voice, the voice in my head that was never ending, that continuously pointed out all of the things that were wrong about my food routine, my body, my exercise habits, all of the ways that I could be better. It was harsh, it was critical, but it felt true. Ed was a derivative of what's called an inner critic. And you might know immediately what I mean when I say inner critic. It's that voice in your head. It's cruel, it's demanding, it's mean. And so before we move on, I just want to take a really quick second, just 1 second, and just think to yourself, do you have a voice like that? And I don't mean an eating disorder voice in particular. I just mean a voice in your head, one that criticizes you, maybe it belittles you, maybe it tells you how lazy you are, how boring you are, how you'll never achieve anything in life. Just a quick show of hands if you have that voice. So we're all on the same page here, right? We unfortunately all have this inner critic that's in our head, something similar to my version of Ed. To be completely honest, Ed took over my mind for years. All I wanted was to get Ed to stop, to get this voice out of my head. I tried ignoring Ed, I tried internally yelling at Ed, I even tried giving in to Ed's behaviors. Restricting more, exercising more, purging more, continuously checking my body to see if I was small enough. But Ed always came back. There was always less food to eat, always more calories to burn, always a skinnier body to desire. And so, as I started on my eating disorder recovery journey, I started attending therapy and reading books on eating disorders, listening to podcasts on recovery. I finally figured it out. I didn't need to ignore Ed or yell at Ed or even succumb to the unhealthy habits that Ed was trying to get me to engage in. The solution was actually quite the opposite. I needed to befriend Ed. So the next question that you might be thinking to yourself now, Abby, how can you befriend a voice that is so harsh, that is so cruel, that is so mean towards you? And listen, I get that right off the bat, this might not feel super intuitive. So what I'm gonna ask is that you all just bear with me for the next 5 minutes. Because in this next 5 minutes, we are going to go through the process of befriending. We're going to go through a really simple 3-step process that's gonna take us from hating our inner critic, from hating that voice in our head, to having compassion for it, to seeing it as a misguided friend. 5 minutes. It starts with the first step of recognizing it, recognizing your inner critic. So let me ask you this. What does your inner critic say to you? What are the typical narratives that it has on repeat in your head? Is it that you're lazy, that you're not good enough, that you're boring, that you'll never find love in life? What is it for you? And if you need a little bit of guidance here, you can start by paying close attention to your thoughts. Start by paying attention to where they're coming from. Is it coming from a place of love, a place of security, of authenticity? That's your core self. We want more of that. Or is it coming from a place of negativity? Is it harsh? Is it sharp? That's our inner critic. Our inner critic sounds like, you're not good enough. You're too much. Nobody actually likes you. Everyone's better than you, so why even bother? You have to be perfect. And the thing is, your inner critic might have tons of different things that it says to you. That's okay. The purposes of this step is just to recognize when it's coming up and what it's saying. And once we do that, once we recognize our inner critic, we can move to the second step, which is to learn the goal of our inner critic. What is so important to understand is that our inner critic has a purpose. It has a goal that it's trying to achieve, or else it wouldn't be here. And so the purpose of this step is just to figure out what that goal is. The way that we are going to do that might feel a little bit weird. Okay, it might feel a little bit unfamiliar, a little bit uncomfortable, so please continue bearing with me through this process. Because the way that we are going to learn the goal of our inner critic is by having a conversation with them. We are going to grab a piece of paper and a pen and imagine our inner critic sitting directly across from us. To start the conversation off, pick one of the many things that your inner critic says to you and write it down. And now imagine your inner critic sitting in front of you saying directly that to your face. Let's take the example, you'll never amount to anything. What we want to understand is why our inner critic is saying that. And so let's ask, why? We ask the question, and then we wait. We wait and we allow our mind the space for our inner critic to respond. And trust me, your inner critic will respond. Well, because you're not doing enough. You need to get ahead on job applications. You need to network more. You need to do more. Well, why? What will happen if I don't do more? And just to remind everyone here, we want to learn as much as we can about our inner critic. That is why we are going to continue asking these open-ended questions that really allow our inner critic the space to respond, to say everything that they need to say. And we are going to observe their responses in a distanced, detached, non-judgmental way. I always recommend that this conversation goes back and forth for a lot longer than I'm going to show here, just to really feel like you're understanding your inner critic, you're understanding what kind of makes it tick. But for the purposes of this talk, we're just kind of going to get right down to it. So we ask why, and our inner critic responds, well, you're not going to get your dream job. You're going to let everyone down. You'll be miserable. I feel like I have to be constantly pushing you, or you're just going to go down this path of unhappiness. Do you see that? The inner critic is scared that you'll be unhappy. It truly believes that if it doesn't keep nagging at you, you won't do the things that you supposedly need to do to live a happy life. It truly believes that by telling you that you're not doing enough, that you won't amount to anything, a fire is going to light inside of you to take action, to take charge, to get moving on your goals. Your inner critic is actually trying to help you. The root reason behind its negativity is pure. It's good. It's loving. This is the most crucial part of the entire process. It is the moment when you flip from viewing your inner critic with a lens of hate, with a lens of distaste, into viewing it with a lens of compassion, of love, of clarity, of understanding. And once we have this realization, we are propelled into the next and final step to meet our inner critic with kindness and compassion. Because now that we have understood that the root reason behind our inner critic is good, that it's actually trying to help us, it's so much easier to be understanding towards that voice, to have compassion for it. But while we can understand and acknowledge that our inner critic is trying to help us, that doesn't mean that we need to accept the method that it's using. That doesn't mean we need to continue to allow it to be negative, to be harsh, to rule our minds. Because let's be honest, that method doesn't work. If it did, it would have worked by now. So this step is about firstly thanking our inner critic. Thank it for what it's been trying to do, for trying to create this happy life. Because hey, we also want that life. We also want to be happy. But secondly, and so importantly, it is about kindly setting a boundary with our inner critic, letting it know that we, our core self, we are going to take the reins. We are going to take the lead so that we can find an effective way to reach these goals that we both want. So let's grab that piece of paper again, and let's just start by thanking it. Thank our inner critic, share our appreciation for what they're trying to do, but secondly, set the boundary. From here, you can continue to converse with your inner critic. You can continue to find a way that you both can achieve these goals, a path that will really, really work. But the purpose of what I want to show here, and really kind of the core essence of this step, is the fact that we are engaging with our inner critic in a loving way. We're not getting mad at it. We're not fighting it. We're not aggravating it, because that is just going to make it continue to come up. We are meeting it in a loving way. We are partaking in a kind takeover, because that is what is going to give our inner critic the allowance, the okay to take a step back, to stop from the constant nagging. When we meet ourselves with kindness, when we speak to ourselves with love and compassion, that is what gives us the energy, the motivation to do the things that bring us joy, to do the things that the inner critic wants to achieve. The inner critic is trying to get you to take action, to get moving on your goals, but the impact of its negativity, of its words, of its critiques has the absolute opposite effect. You're not jumping up to get ahead on projects, to network more, to meet the love of your life. You're sitting there feeling terribly about yourself, getting ready to watch more of your TV show that you've been watching all day. The inner critic's method is not working. And so, when the inner critic pops up, which it inevitably will, go through this 3-step process. Recognize it, learn the goal, meet it with kindness and compassion. Go through this 3-step process and see how your life changes. See the difference in your well-being when you take a stance of love, a stance of compassion towards yourself, towards the things that you want to do in your life. And now, I leave you with one last question to ponder. How does your inner critic think that it's helping you? Thank you.